Chapter 11 of The Sword and the Stone. Kay has decided that they will go on the adventure to the Siege of Air and Darkness, where Morgan Le Fay is holding Friar Tuck and the dog boy. Robin Wood smiled at Kay and patted him on the back, while the wart thought despairingly about his poor dog. Then the outlaw cleared his throat and began to speak again, this time in a serious voice. "You are quite right about going there," he said, "but I must tell you the unpleasant part. Nobody can get into the Siege of Air and Darkness except a boy." "Do you mean we can't get in?" "You could get in," said Robin. "I suppose," explained the wart, when he had thought this over, "it is like the thing about unicorns." "You are right. A unicorn is a magic animal, and only a maiden can catch that. Fairies are magic too, and only a boy can enter their enchanted towers. That's why they always take changelings out of cradles." Kay and Wart sat in silence for a moment. Then Kay said, "Well, I'm game. It is my adventure after all." The Wart said, "I want to go too. You see, I am fond of Cavil." Robin looked at Marion triumphantly. "There!" he said. Marion kissed them both, and they blushed. "Very well," said Robin. "We won't make a fuss about it, but we will talk about plans. I think it is pretty good of you two to go for it, without really knowing what you're in for, but it won't be as bad as you think." "We shall come with you," said Marion. "The whole band of us will come with you to the castle. You will only have to do the going-in part at the end." "Yes, the whole band of us will account for those stinking griffins of hers afterwards. That's the least we can do." "Are there griffins?" "Indeed there are. The Siege of Air and Darkness is guarded by a circle of 50 griffins and 50 wrens, day and night. We'll have a pitched battle with those on the way back and slay them all. But we shall have to creep past them on the way there, or they will give the alarm, and the boys won't be able to get in. It'll be a terrific stalk." "Hurrah!" "We shall have to wait till night." "Please, Robin Wood, we only consent to enter this enchantress's palace and rescue Friar Tuck for you if you promise that we may help in fighting the griffins afterwards." "Well, Marion?" "Drat them," said Marion. "It's blackmail, but still, they are lambs." The boys passed the morning pleasantly, getting accustomed to two of Maid Marian's bows. Robin had insisted on this, saying that no man could shoot with another's bow any more than he could cut with another's scythe. For their midday meal they had cold venison pâté with mead, as also did everyone else. The outlaws drifted in for the meal like a conjuring trick. At one moment there would be nobody at the edge of the clearing, at the next half a dozen right inside it, green or sunburned men who had silently materialized out of the bracket of the trees. In the end there were about 100 of them, eating merrily and laughing, the food was dished out from a leafy bower where Marion and her attendants cooked. The outlaws usually posted a sentry to take the tree messages during the afternoon, partly because so much of their hunting had to be done in times when most workmen sleep, and partly because generally the wild beasts take a nap in the afternoon, and so should their hunters. This afternoon, however, Robin called the boys to council. "Look here, Wharton Kay," he said. "You had better know exactly what you are going to do. My whole band of 100 will march with you toward Queen Morgan's castle in 4 parties. You two will be in Marion's party. When we get to a certain oak tree which was struck by lightning in the year of the great storm, we shall be within a mile of the Griffin Guard. There we shall meet together as a rendezvous, and afterwards we shall have to move like shadows. We must get through those griffins without an alarm. If we do get through them, and if all goes well, we others shall surround the castle at a distance of about 400 yards. We dare not come nearer, you see, on account of the iron of our arrowheads, and from that moment you will have to go alone. Now, Kay and Wart, I must explain about iron. If our poor friends really have been captured by fairies, I mean by good people, and if Queen Morgan the Fay is really the queen of them, we have one advantage on our side. None of the good people can bear the touch or the sight or even the closeness of iron. The reason is that the good people spring from the days of flint, before ever iron was invented, and all their troubles have come from the new metal. The Roman cohorts had steel swords, which is even better than iron, and that is how they succeeded in driving the old folk underground. This is the reason why we, with our steel arrowheads tonight, must keep well away for fear of giving them the uncomfortable feeling. But you two, with an iron knife blade held close in your hands, will be safe from the Queen of Air and Darkness, as long as you don't let go of the blades. All you will have to do is walk the last distance, keeping a good grip on your iron, to enter the castle in safety, and to make your way to the cell in which our prisoners are confined. I shall give you extra knives to carry to Friar Tuck, as Wat and the dog boy, and an iron collar for Cavil. As soon as the prisoners are in possession of this iron, they will be able to walk out with you. When you have walked out again and joined our band, we can make our way home happily in triumph and slay those griffins on the road. Do you understand this, Kay and Wart? Yes, please, said the boys. We understand it perfectly. There is one more thing. The most important of all is to hold on to your iron. But the next most important thing is not to eat. Anybody who eats in a you-know-what stronghold is compelled to stay there forever. So, for all sake's sake, don't eat anything whatever inside the castle, however tempting it may look. Will you remember this? We will remember, said the boys. After this staff lecture, Robin went away to give his orders to the mere men. He made them a long speech explaining all about the griffins and the wrens and the stock and what the boys were going to do. As soon as he had finished his speech, which was listened to in perfect silence, an odd thing happened. He began it again at the beginning and spoke it from start to finish in the same words. On finishing the second time, he said, "Now, captains!" And all those 100 men split into groups of 20, went to different parts of the clearing, and stood around Mary and Little John, Much, Scarlet, and Robin. From each of these groups, a humming noise rose in the sky. "What on earth are they doing?" asked Kay. "Listen," said the Wart. They were repeating the speech, word for word. Probably none of them could read or write, but they had learned to listen and to remember. This was the way in which Robin kept touch with his raiders. By night, by knowing that each man knew by heart all that the leader himself knew, and why he was able to trust them, when necessary, to move each man by himself. When all the men had repeated their instructions, and everyone was word perfect in the long speech, there was an issue of war arrows, a dozen to each man. The arrows had bigger heads, ground to razor sharpness, and they were heavily feathered in a square cut. There was a bow inspection, and 2 or 3 men were issued new strings. They all fell silent. "Now then!" cried Robin cheerfully. He waved his arm in a generous gesture, and the men, smiling, raised their bows in salute. Then there was a sigh, a rustle, a snap of one innocuous twig, or of one incautious twig, and the clearing of the giant lime tree was empty as it had been before the days of man. "Come with me," said Marion, touching the boys on the shoulder. Behind them, the bees hummed in the leaves. It was a long march and a tedious one. The artificial glades which converged upon the lime tree in the form of a cross were no longer of use after the first half hour. After that, they had to make their way through the virgin forest as best they might. It would not have been so bad if they had been able to kick and slash their way through it, but they were supposed to move in silence. Maid Marian showed them how to go sideways, one side after the other, how to stop at once when a bramble caught them, and take it patiently out, how to put their feet down sensitively, and then roll their weight on that leg as soon as they were certain that no twig was under the foot, how to distinguish at a glance the places which gave most hope of an easy passage, and how a kind of rhythm in their movements would help them in spite of these obstacles. Although there were 100 invisible men on every side of them, moving toward the same goal, they heard no sounds but their own. The men had felt a little disgruntled at first at being put into Marian's band. They would have preferred to have gone with Robin, and thought that being put under Marian was like being entrusted to a governess. They soon found out their mistake. She had objected to their coming, but now that their coming was ordered, she accepted them as companions in war. Nor was it easy to be a companion of hers. In the first place, it was impossible to keep up with her unless she waited for them, for she could move on all fours or even wriggle like a snake almost as quickly as they could walk. And in second place, she was an accomplished soldier, which they were not. One of the bits of advice which she gave them before talking had to be stopped was this: aim high when you shoot in war rather than low. A low arrow strikes only the ground. A high one may kill in the second rank. If I am ever made to be married, thought the wart, who had his doubts on the subject, I will marry a girl like this, a kind of golden vixen. As a matter of fact, though, the boys did not know it. Marian could hoot like an owl by blowing into her fists, or whistle that shrill blast between tongue and teeth with the fingers at the corners of the mouth, could bring all the birds to her by imitating their calls, and understand much of their small language, such as when the tits exclaim that a hawk is coming, could hit the popinjay twice for 3 times of robins, and could turn cartwheels, but none of these accomplishments were necessary at the moment. The twilight fell mistily. It was the first of the autumn mists, and in the dimity, the undispersed families of the tawny owl called to each other, the young with "queek," and the old with the proper "hoo, hoo," proportionately. As the brambles and obstacles became harder to see, so did they become easier to feel. It was odd, but in the deepening silence the wart found himself able to move more silently instead of the reverse. Being reduced to touch and sound, he found himself in better accord with these, and could go quietly and quick. It was about Compline, or as we should call it, 9 o'clock at night, and they had covered at least 7 miles of the toilsome forest when Marian touched Kay on the shoulder and pointed into the blue darkness. They could see in the dark now, as well as human beings can see in it, and much better than townspeople will ever manage to, and there in front of them, struck through 7 miles of trackless forest by Marian's woodcraft, was the smitten oak. They decided with one accord, without even a whisper, to creep up to it so silently that even the members of their own army, who might already be waiting there, would not know of their arrival. They crept. But a motionless man has always the advantage of a man in motion, and they had hardly reached the outskirts of the roots when friendly hands took hold of them, patted their backs with pats as light as thistledown, and guided them to seats. The roots were crowded. It was like being a member of a band of starlings, or of roosting rooks. In the night mystery, 100 men breathed on every side of Wart, like a surge of our own blood, which we can hear when we are writing or reading in the late and lonely hours. They were in the dark and stilly womb of night. Presently the wart noticed that the grasshoppers were creaking their shrill note, so tiny as to be almost extra audible, like the creak of the bat. They creaked one after the other. They creaked when Marian had creaked thrice in order to account for Kay as wart as well as for herself. 100 times as the outlaws were present, and it was time to go. There was a rustle as if the wind had moved in the last few leaves of that 900-year-old oak. Then an owl hooted soft, a field mouse screamed, a rabbit thumped, a dog-fox barked his deep single lion's cough, and an airy mouse twittered above their heads. The leaves rustled again more lengthily, while you could count 100, and then Maid Marian, who had done the rabbit's thump, was surrounded by her band of 20 plus 2. The wart felt a man on either side of him take his hand, and as they stood in a circle, and then he noticed that the stridulation of grasshoppers had begun again. It was going round the circle toward him, and as the last grasshopper rubbed its legs together, the man on his right squeezed his hand. Wart stridulated. Instantly the man on his left did the same, and pressed his hand also. There were 22 grasshoppers before Maid Marian's band was ready for its last stalk through the silent forest. And we will pause there.